What is up, everybody? Live on a Thursday evening. Thank you so much for joining us, those of you that are here. I know we said we'd be live after every practice, but a couple things going on yesterday. Ryan's a little bit under the weather. We had a practice. The last practice was yesterday. I had a baseball little league practice yesterday, so I said, "Hey, let's wrap this thing up. Give ourselves some time to digest what we've seen this week. We'll come back with a big show to send us into a mini vacation here on Thursday night. This is the Shout Buffalo Bills football podcast. Welcome in. Joined as always by Ryan Talbot. I am Matt Parrino. And if you notice, we got an old friend back on board. This is the Shout Bills football podcast brought to you by Tops Friendly Markets, your friendly neighborhood store. And we're so excited to have them back in the mix. I have a Tops right around the corner from my house. So that's where I frequent the most, especially on the move. And I love Tops for that reason specifically. You can get in and out of there. It's never like this, full production that it might be at some other spots. And also, I got to throw out there too, I was in Orchard Park for Minicamp this week, and lo and behold, I just stopped in at a Tops because I needed something really quickly. Orchard Park might have the nicest Tops I have ever seen in my life. About 3 or 4 minutes from the stadium. If you've never been there, go check it out. We wanted to lead off with that. We're so thankful to have them on board again for this season. They see they wanted to partner up, and we're excited to have them back. So with that in mind, Ryan, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing better. Voice is better from yesterday, feeling better from yesterday. So, bouncing back from whatever little cold I had going on.
All right, so the Bills finished up minicamp yesterday. They only had 2 days of practices for what was originally scheduled for 3 days. Now, I seen some people on social media be like, "Oh, what's going on with canceled third day?" It's very common. You come in here, the team likes, the coaching staff probably, uses it maybe as a motivational tool. But some teams actually cancel their minicamp altogether, and so. Getting out of there a day early. I mean, this is a veteran-laden bunch. I wasn't very surprised by that. Some great reminders in the comments. Some of our regulars, Elliot Eisler over there, hit that like button if you would, if you're watching on YouTube. Also, smash that subscribe button. Ryan, we're going to get into all my observations from yesterday. Often imitated, never duplicated. This is where you need to be, the Shout Buffalo Bills football podcast, for observations from the practice field. And we're going to get into a lot of them today, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Matt is there. There's certain things he can say and cannot say, but most importantly, he is there. So he gives us a great glimpse of what's happening, what's to come, and gives us an idea of how these veterans are looking, as well as some of these younger players on the roster.
All right, so let's start off at the top with, and I did it for you, partner. One of your favorites, Antonio Williams, has a big day yesterday. I wanted to get started right there. The first play that really popped for me, and we're going to get into the running back conversation a little bit more in depth here, was, nothing crazy. It was a bang play, run up the middle, ran it in for a touchdown, kind of went untouched. It was actually surprising. He kind of was almost like a blur out of the backfield, and they were mixing in some run and some pass yesterday throughout, the practice, but Williams had a chance to, take advantage of an opportunity, and he did that. On another play, he took a throw from out of the backfield, ran what I think would have been a touchdown in a real game situation as well. So you go back to Miami last year, that season finale game against the Dolphins, and Antonio Williams puts in 2 touchdowns. He's kind of picking up where he left off. I know there's no pads, but hey, it's June and we need something to talk about. A nice day for him with Matt Breida nursing whatever injury that he has. We haven't gotten clarification on that, but he missed both practices this week. So Antonio Williams had a chance to make some plays, and he did.
Yeah, don't forget about Antonio Williams when you're talking about this running back depth chart in 2021. I know there was a running joke last year where he would get released from the practice squad, come back on, and it felt like he was bounced on and off of that thing about 10 times. But anytime a player is released and then re-signed that many times, it actually tells you how much they actually do value him. It's just tough when they were in a pandemic year and they already had a lot of running backs, but they kept bringing him back because they said there's something here with this guy. There's some talent. former, I believe, 4-star running back, played at North Carolina. A lot of talent in terms of special teams too. And then when he finally did get that opportunity against the Dolphins, he ran all over them. He was good out of the backfield as a receiver. He can do a little bit of everything. And I think his skill set is exactly what the Bills are looking for with the running back position. So while they have invested in Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, and they added Matt Breida, don't forget about Williams. I think he can really factor into the backfield in 2021.
Yeah, I like Williams' approach. I like the way that, the versatility going back to last year and the adaptability is something that's really stuck out to me. I mean, at one point last year, it felt like he was on his way to becoming the running backs coach back at his alma mater at North Carolina. He was able to kind of flip things on a dime, get back to Orchard Park, finish out the season on the practice squad, keep working and earn an opportunity. And that's what you're going to have. And I know a lot of people are penciling in Breida as that third running back. And that might end up being the case. I mean, they brought him here for, with his specific skill set, I would imagine, in mind. We talked to Brandon Beane about that and Sean McDermott, and something that they've lauded Breida for. But I like Williams' versatility in his game, and I also like that he could do a couple of different things. And hey, Zach Moss is coming off of a big-time injury. You wonder how quickly he'll be able to be at full speed. So I anticipate Antonio Williams to still kind of be in the mix here with opportunities and chances. And in these practice settings, when we get to training camp and the pads come on and they get a little bit more important, these are the kinds of lasting images that you leave in the minds of the coaching staff that matter when you get down to those 53-man roster decisions. And whether or not, maybe it's not the 53-man roster decision, maybe it's getting a spot on that practice squad and using him in a similar role as they did last year, have him be ready in case there's injuries. But we've also seen two guys in Singletary and Moss who tend to get injured a little bit.
Yeah, very fair. And again, this team loves players that can contribute in multiple ways. He was special teams MVP at North Carolina, so he can contribute in that regard as well. So he could even push a Tywan Jones on this roster. A lot of people forget about Tywan. He is a running back by position, mostly there for his special teams. So if the Bills really do like Antonio Williams, that could be his main competition in terms of landing on this 53-man roster and then carving out some kind of role on the team.
I've seen some comments in here early on about the defense, and that's basically what I started my story on yesterday. Was, listen, this defense been outplaying the offense, and it's good, and at the same time, I think if you're a fan, you like to see the defense kind of answering the bell here early on. It's a group that's very familiar with each other. At the same time, I think that we do get a little bit carried away with what we're, actually discussing and diving into here. They're not wearing pads. It's not real football. The defense isn't really even, hitting guys really. And the battles up front are very, watered down, for lack of a better term. So, defense has been making some splashy plays. And when those plays happen, we're going to talk about him. And Matt Milano was asked about it yesterday. I mean, the energy from this defense, Ryan, it's obvious. And something we've been talking about in recent episodes about, a defense that I believe has a bit of a chip on its shoulder, a defense that has a ton of continuity. They're very, Milano said it yesterday, that back seven, if you count Taron Johnson as part of that mix, which, judging by the starting lineup last year, you got to, this back seven is pretty consistently played together for the last 3 seasons. And so there is a level of understanding of not only the playbook, but each other to really set this defense up if they get an improved level of play from that defensive line to kind of hit the ground and running. And I believe Matt Milano in that this defense, and this team in a lot of ways is ahead of the curve with not only the attendance at minicamp, full attendance these last 2 days, but also the continuity that they just have based on the roster construction.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that they have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder because, 2017, the defense played a huge role in the Bills ending that playoff drought. 2019, same thing. The defense kind of helped carry the offense across the finish line, so to speak. So you get to last year and you're like, boy, if the offense is just a little bit better and the defense plays at the level they have been, this team can be a real threat. Well, the offense takes a huge leap and they're unbelievable, but it's the defense that takes a step back. If you can get both units playing, the Bills of 2020 on offense and then a little bit of that defense that we saw 2017, 2018, 2019, then this team is going to be a real threat to go to the Super Bowl. Not only go to the Super Bowl, but win it all. That's how much talent they have on both sides of the ball, and that's how much potential they have on both sides of the ball.
Mm-hmm. I wrote that Josh Allen, by my charting, and this is an inexact science because it's hard sometimes to tell which plays are blown dead and which plays they run back. Like, for instance, he threw an interception to Levi Wallace, which I have in our outline here, and it was, I think that the defense was offside. Addison and Oliver were in on Allen pretty quickly, flushed him out. I don't think he probably throws that pass in a regular game, but, because it's that practice setting. So you read that and you're probably like, and I didn't even put the interception in my story because there was just too many questions around how it transpired. And there's a lot of those kind of plays. But by my count, 3 for 12 for Josh Allen. He started off slow. There weren't a lot of connection, but there's a big reason why. And it's one of the guys I want to talk about right now. There was a concerted effort yesterday to maybe work on that chemistry between Emmanuel Sanders and Josh Allen. This is only the second week worth of practices that Sanders and Allen have been around each other. He was there for week 2 of OTAs. He wasn't there week 1 and week 3, just like Stephon Diggs. And so they were taking some chances. And there was a few plays where, you could just tell that they're just not in sync yet. There was one play where, he was kind of over the middle. He thought the route called for him to move a little bit towards his left after the break. Josh Allen thought he was going to his right. He threw it right past, like 5 yards of space in between them. There was another play later on in practice where Josh Allen threw a gorgeous ball, and he made a great move. He lost Levi Wallace, had the ball right in his chest, and he just dropped it. So that was another kind of like, oh man, like if you're, sitting there watching that, if you're a Bills fan, you're like, oh, that's the catch that you want to see a 34-year-old vet wide receiver make in that situation in Emmanuel Sanders, but he's still getting his feet wet, still getting comfortable. I mean, this is really he's probably only had this is probably his 5th or 6th practice as a Bill. So again, not over any of this stuff. I mean, it's not anything to be scared about or nervous about. It's the beginning stages of this. The other play I wanted to mention before I turn it over to you, Ryan, was this is where I could really tell they were forcing the issue because, they ran a play during an 11-on-11 drill. Sanders kind of broke in, I would say maybe 15 yards down the field, and Allen really tried to force it into him. They had a couple plays where it wasn't working. So he's like, I'm going to get the ball to Sanders in this spot. I like it. I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to take a chance. Well, Tremaine Edmonds was all over it. He broke on the ball. He had perfect positioning. The problem is, and I know fans might not want to hear this, you dropped the interception. And this is something that's kind of, become a little bit of a narrative with him, is not being able to make those plays, being around the ball oftentimes in the passing game and not making the play. He darted off the field and did about maybe 10 or 15 push-ups as penance for his mistake. But a great play by the defense to break it up on a play that he was going for Emmanuel Sanders. I just think it's just the type of thing that I wouldn't be surprised if Allen and Sanders don't link up with other teammates at some point over the next 6 weeks, continue to build that chemistry, because it's going to need to be built.
Yeah, that's just it. The chemistry is not there yet. They need some time to work on it, develop it. So I wouldn't read too much into Josh's day or Emmanuel Sanders' drop, anything like that. Give that some time. And the defense, they're smart guys. They probably, had a good inkling or good idea that Allen was going to be targeting Sanders early and often. So it allowed them to kind of sit on some routes and try to get those interceptions. So it's a smart all-around team. They probably knew what Allen's plan was, and practice is the perfect time, by the way, for Allen to be aggressive as well and try different things and to try to zip some passes in, because at the end of the day, these stats don't count toward anything. So work on that rapport, work on that chemistry, and then by week 1, I'm sure they'll be on the same page.
Yeah, so opposite of Allen, Mitchell Trubisky, he had himself a really solid day. And I don't want to overstate it here. I mean, there was, opposed to what Allen was doing, I didn't really necessarily notice a lot of chances that Mitchell Trubisky was taking. It's kind of more of the same, but, you're executing the offense. And at this stage of things, that's what you want to see out of your quarterback. He made a couple a good throw, one on a real tight window throw that I thought kind of threaded the needle, and he just made a really good play. And that's something that, we talked about it a couple of times. I'm going back to my notes here because, this happened yesterday, Ryan. And I got to say that my my memory here isn't really serving me well. He threw the ball to Antonio Williams on that one touchdown that I mentioned. He also, I kind of have it broken up here into each play. It was actually to Brandon Powell, who, Brandon Powell's got himself, pretty involved offensively. Like it almost reminds me a lot of what Andre Roberts has done, the last couple years during these camps periods where, you'd think of him as the kick returner, in Powell's case, competing for a kick return job. And you tend to see him a lot out there on offense. And Brandon Powell has been making plays when, they've been there to be made. So that's an interesting nugget there that I think people should know. There was another play, 2 plays during one of the 4 11-on-11 segments. He went to Kumaro in a one-on-one situation in the end zone, and he was up against Josh Thomas, who another one of these young secondary players. There's a couple of UDFAs. Josh Thomas goes up there playing in a red non-contact jersey, rips the ball out, incompletion, touchdown. Jesus isn't able to haul it in. And, Matt Milano, we talked to him yesterday. He was the one bill we got after practice. And he specifically mentioned Nick McLeod, who we've been talking about the past couple of weeks. A lot of these young secondary players, Tariq Thompson is another player, Nick McLeod, Rashad Wildgoose, they're making an impact here early on. And I think that, from a Bills perspective, who haven't gone out and brought in a veteran person in any of the secondary positions, safety either, that really maybe, backs up, what they were thinking going into this whole thing.
Yeah, we've talked about this. I think they feel that they can really develop these young players in the secondary. And to their credit, you can look at Levi Wallace. You can look at Dane Jackson. You can it's harder with the safeties because they've had Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer since day one. And these guys were veterans who have come in and obviously taken their games to another level, especially Poyer from where he was earlier in his career. But they've had that established. But they've had younger Jaquan Johnson, who's kind of waiting in the wings for an opportunity. And you have Taron Johnson at corner, Saran Neal. The list goes on and on. They've had some success stories already. So I'm sure they feel pretty confident about what they can and cannot do at that position or the secondary overall. And right now, it's hard to doubt them just because of the success that they have had.
Indeed. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome. This is the Shout Buffalo Bills football podcast brought to you by Tops, your neighborhood store with more. And back on board for another season. We're so excited. I actually have to I'll get better at this as we go, but we're going to be doing some reads for Tops this year. Tops Fresh Burger Bar with over 30 varieties of beef, turkey, chicken, plant-based, and gourmet blend burgers ready to grill. Tops Fresh Burger Bar has you smiling all summer long. And I got to be honest with you, I've been a long time stan of Tops ground beef. I always go there to quickly to get my burger meat, and we're actually going to we got some in the fridge. We're going to be getting after it tomorrow night, so I'm excited about that. A nice little Friday night on the grill. Summer in Buffalo, it is a beautiful thing. Let's get into this defense a little bit more, and I know that a couple people have mentioned, I see some chat in here on Cole Beasley, and he obviously was in the news today. We're going to touch on that at the end of the show, so a little bit of a cliffhanger there, but stay tuned. We will not leave you hanging there. We'll get into that before we get out of here. The defense has been playing really well at all, 3 levels. You can see the familiarity, and even what I think is more impressive is the guys that are new, Gregory Rousseau and Boogie Basham, the rookies. Star Lotulelei has not been really in the mix in team drills this week. They're obviously bringing him back slow, and Sean McDermott even mentioned it. He's got a long way to go before he's back even in football shape. I know he's been doing a lot of training, but, they're probably going to want him to put some more weight on. And, the veterans, for the most part, Hughes and Addison were out there and they were participating, like I mentioned, but, definitely dial back. I mean, this is a period where you really can get a ton of reps for guys like Greg Rousseau and Boogie Basham and AJ Epinesa, guys that you really want to rely on this year. And that's, it goes back to what Brandon Beane said. Like, yeah, we made some of these picks for the future, but we made them for this year too. The one guy to me that has stood out really, though, the battles have been so fun to watch, as always. Tre'Davious White made a couple big plays yesterday. He's already in midseason form, and sometimes I sit back, Ryan, and I think we spend so much time talking about CB2, and rightfully so. I mean, listen, wherever you stand in that discussion, whatever camp you're in, they need more help. They're set with what they have. It's easy to forget that they are really set at what they have at CB1. And Tre'Davious White, I'll be excited to get a chance to chat with him as we move through training camp and maybe even tap into how healthy he was last year. I still kind of sit back and wonder how much that injury kind of nagged him, whatever kept him out of the Tennessee game throughout the season. He just at times didn't look right. And so I'll be interested to see how he answers that. Matt Milano said when he got back from that injury last year, he was 100%. He didn't want any part of any excuses when we talked to him yesterday. But Tre'Davious White has looked just like the Tre'Davious White that everybody's come to see and know, making plays against Stephon Diggs. Those battles in practice, they're already at that intensity level that we saw last year, and the pads aren't even on yet. And so I feel like both guys are just chomping at the bit. We mentioned the energy on the defensive side. There was energy on the offensive side too. I don't want to downplay that. Stephon Diggs, right before 11 on 11 started, he kind of meandered his way over to the defensive huddle, really the defensive sideline. And there was a little bit of chirping back and forth, like getting things like amped up. And Stephon Diggs, we know, always brings the energy. But that was, those are some fun battles. And Tre'Davious White, man, sometimes I think you take him for granted a little bit.
Yeah, and the old saying, iron sharpens iron. So having those two go at it, it's only going to make both of them better in their respective games. Route running for Diggs, coverage for White. So it's great to have those two going at it already. And when you talk about Trey White, you're right. Last year was not his banner year. It did seem like he was a little bit off. He was giving up some more receptions than you come to expect almost, because he's played at such a high level. But at the same time, I think White's excellence over the early part of his career has really made that whole conversation about cornerback 2 so relevant over the last few years. Well, are the Bills going to be okay with insert whatever player is in there, EJ Gaines, Levi Wallace, this, that, or the other? Because when you have a true number one cornerback, such as Trey White, teams are going to go after your number 2 early and often. If a team doesn't have a true number 1, they both get attacked a fair amount. And we've seen that with the Bills. They throw at Trey White a little bit here and there, but for the most part, a lot of the action goes to the other side of the field. So it's almost like his excellence as well over the early part of his career has played a role in these conversations that we have every single year on cornerback 2, and can that person hold up and fare well and do their job?
Another update. Let's stay on the defensive side, and then we'll flip over to offense before we move along. Gregory Rousseau, another big practice, and this is the guy that we talk so much around the draft time about Boogie Basham being the guy that just looks so much more pro ready. You break down his film, you figure in the fact that he played football last year. Every step of the way since rookie minicamp all the way through the last practice yesterday of mandatory minicamp, Rousseau has looked apart. And that's what I wrote yesterday. He hasn't been, out of his element at all. It hasn't seemed like that. He's had some really good one-on-one battles. One in particular that I wrote about yesterday was against Darrell Williams. So we're talking about a guy, where I'd be hesitant to say that he won the rep, but it was a battle, and he had an advantage at a time during that battle. And that's a huge sign against a guy last year that absolutely shut down TJ Watt in that Pittsburgh Steelers game. That tells you a lot about, the amount of information and experience Gregory Rousseau is picking up early on in this process. And Leslie Frazier actually said when we talked to him 2 weeks ago, it's very rare that you get a guy in the classroom, like in the meeting rooms. You tell him, you teach him something, and you get him up to speed on something, and then you get out to the grass, and they're able to implement that right away without the excessive amounts of repetitions. Most guys need those repetitions, and early on, what the coaching staff has learned about Gregory Rousseau is you tell him something, and then he finds a way to take that out to the field and apply it and make an impact, and he's made that so far.
Yeah, and that's huge. And that's what the Bills need. They need someone that can come in here, learn under your Jerry Hughes and Mario Addisons, but also make an impact as a rookie. They're not asking this guy to come in and get 10 sacks as a rookie. Same with Boogie Basham, but they want them to contribute early. And you just said it a few minutes ago, these camps, the OTAs, the mini camps, this is the perfect time to get those young guys the reps to see where they're at, how far they've come along in the case of AJ Epineza from year 1 to year 2. But with Rousseau and Boogie Basham, get an idea of what they can and cannot do or what they do really well. How can you implement that? How can you use them? Can you kick them inside, especially a guy like Boogie Basham? You still have F.A. Obata, who's older, but in terms of NFL age, hasn't played in the league that long. So they have a lot of different interesting options. Daryl Johnson is another name that they have that they like quite a bit. So it's really interesting to see how much talent they have. None of those names necessarily jump off the page as a superstar edge rusher. There's no Myles Garrett there right now. But one of these young guys could come along, and again, I'm not saying they're going to be Myles Garrett, but they could turn into a true pass rush threat, and that's exactly what this defense needs. It's been that missing piece for the last few seasons.
Yeah, take a couple questions here. I see a couple in the comments here. Thank you guys. You guys have been very active on YouTube. I tell people all the time, hit that subscribe button if you're watching on your phone or your desktop. What I love YouTube because I watch a lot of content like on my TV because I have the YouTube app right on my smart TV and dial it up in the morning. I end up watching like NBA highlights, talk show clips. I watch a lot of Joe Rogan, different stuff that anything that you like, you just, subscribe to their page and it kind of curates it for you. Almost like, in the cord cutting generation. I mean, the YouTube app is like gold. So definitely hit that subscribe button. If you haven't already, you can watch us on your big screen. We appreciate it. Chris Spencer asked, how has Damar Hamlin looked? We need to be sure we have some safety depth with how aggressive Poyer's play is. It would be nice to have that next man up ready. And that is a great observation or a great take, if you will. I haven't noticed Damar Hamlin too much. And I don't think that that's necessarily a problem at this stage. I think a lot of young players, as many of the young players that have been able to make plays, at the safety position, you got to be in the right place at the right time. And remember, depending on what part of the practice there is, if you're not out there for, a play where, you're in the mix, like I mentioned, Josh Thomas making that play against Jake Kumaro. Well, that just happened to be a play where he was in the mix as a safety on one. I don't know if I could. The only other safety that I would say was involved in a pass play that really stood out was Jordan Poyer earlier in practice. So that's 2 in the whole practice. Josh Allen looked to, fire it in. Nice loft pass to Dawson Knox. And actually, let me bring that up here if I have it, because it was a nice pass and there was some pressure from somebody. Let me see if I can find this here. Look at me, Ryan, going to my
you're going to town on those notes.
My handy dandy notebook. It was a really good throw, and I wrote it down. Rousseau. That was the rep against Darrell Williams when I think the pressure was coming from Rousseau, and Allen wanted to get a little bit earlier than he wanted to. Put a nice ball out there to Dawson Knox, but 50-50 ball, and Jordan Poyer, the veteran safety that, that's not his first rodeo. He made a play and knocked it down. So, I haven't seen Damar Hamlin a ton, but I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah, well said. Right now it's almost a good thing because there's only limited opportunities, like you mentioned, and the opposite of that would be noticing him for doing something wrong. So he hasn't done anything wrong. He hasn't been out of place. He hasn't. He's looked the part, so to speak, and that's a good thing. So it's early. Wait till training camp. As training camp comes along, I'm sure there'll be plenty of Damar Hamlin talk to be had.
There we go. Look at this. Jason Taylor live on the YouTube app on my TV right now. He's watching us. There's Bills content every night. And that is true. There is a lot of Bills content out there. So make sure that you're making the right choice when you're taking in some of that content. And I had this in here and I'm going to bring it up. And Ryan, you know me, like the both of us, we do tons of podcasts and interviews. I am a big supporter of the content creation community. I feel in a lot of ways, I'm a credentialed media member, but I feel like I'm this weird crossover, we're this crossover between the two. And we like that being in that space. I've been on so many different shows, but I also do caution you, like, shout out to Dan Mitchell. I caught his show the other night because he actually used my observations article yesterday, cited it, went through it, and Very cool. Like I think that's what this is all here for. It's part of the conversation. But make sure you really have it dialed in and you're paying attention to what everybody's saying, because sometimes I have noticed that as much as I do participate in it, I consume a lot of it too, just to, get a feel for, a lot of times these are fans doing these shows. And so for me, I always like to have my finger on the pulse of the fan. And I've noticed then, and this is not a particular shot at anybody in particular, but I've noticed in different times, just some faulty information out there, or, maybe some people talking about things that, it doesn't really add up. So just make sure that you're, and I know that we have a lot of astute Bills fans in here. Make sure you have it locked on at all times. But just a little note.
Well said. Like you said, sometimes, especially if it's from the fan perspective, sometimes opinion can take over, opinions that they may have on a player already. So it's really important to be locked in on those that are there, such as Matt, such as these other credentialed media members, to get to, the latest and most accurate, up-to-date information.
But hey, I'm not knocking it, because I watch a lot of it, and I think a lot of people do a really good show. I'm doing a full circuit, Ryan. I'm going on UK Bills podcast on Sunday. Excited for that interview. Every time I get to chat to the guys over there in the UK, I'm doing Trainwreck tomorrow. I think it's the Bills show that they have there. Bruce exclusive next Wednesday. I'm doing that show as well. I've done, the Rico Report, Buffalo Fanatics. I was on with those guys. I've been on, we've had Greg and Aaron on. I love the community, man. So I guess it's just a little note to, pay attention to what you're watching, and to what you're seeing shared on social media. I feel like my own example, Ryan, I was out of practice the other day. I'm going through my timeline and I retweeted something from a fake media account about Tua. Said he had 9 interceptions or something like that. And listen, I was at practice. I was busy. But, you can kind of get caught up in some of that stuff. So anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about some more Bills. I want to get back to the offensive side of the ball. I've seen in the comment section a couple times asking about the young offensive lineman. And in particular, yesterday, the young 5th-round draft pick, Tommy Doyle, didn't have the strongest day. And there was 2 reps back-to-back where he went up against Mike Love and then A.J. Epinesa on the next play. And he was just overpowered. He was overmatched. He looked like a 5th-round draft pick in his 4th week of, camp practices, still looking to kind of get his footing. And, I think going up against guys like, especially a guy like Mike Love, who's sneaky, much more of a veteran than I think the casual fan really understands. I mean, this guy has been in the mix towards the end of roster cutdown for the last 3 seasons. He had the 1 year where he was out, but this is a guy that's flashed and popped plenty. And he's a guy that's just kind of been waiting in the wings for an opportunity that, working towards that. He's a really good NFL, bottom of the roster caliber player. And who knows, maybe more. He hasn't had an opportunity to show. And when you're going up against him as a young offensive lineman in practice, you better get your big boy pants on, because it's going to be a battle. He lost that one to Mike Love, and then A.J. Epinesa, I try to pick my words properly here, but he definitely schooled the youngster a little bit. It was a really nice rep from Epinesa, to the point where Sean McDermott actually sent A.J. Epinesa off the field. I think he wanted to get somebody in, maybe lower down the there's no depth chart this time of year, but somebody else that might give the young rookie a better look. But, something to pass along, where I feel like that, I haven't noticed it as much, those big time wins for the defender against Spencer Brown. I have seen it written about by some of my colleagues. I think once or twice last week, or the last week of OTAs. But for Doyle, I've seen it a few times now and had to write about it yesterday.
Yeah, and, like you said, 5th-round pick. So someone taken on day 3. They took him for the athleticism, the fact that he has plenty of playing experience at a smaller school, mind you, Miami of Ohio. But that's someone that they want to develop. He's not someone that they're expecting most likely to see on the field much this season. Maybe he'll be a swing tackle at some point if there's an injury here or there and someone gets moved around. But realistically, you're not going to see much out of him. They want to develop this guy. They think that they like what they have, obviously, in their starters. They like what they have in Spencer Brown. Bobby Hart's there as an option as well. So there is a pecking order in place. And right now, Tommy Doyle is toward the bottom of that. So they like him, but don't read too much into that either, because this is someone that they want to develop and bring along and hope that he's ready most likely by 2022.
Indeed. Another offensive player and then a defensive player reminded me to get back to that, because I did have a note in here that I wanted to pass along before we move on to a Dolphins conversation. And also we'll wrap up with Cole Beasley. So Quentin Morris, we've been talking about him dating back to rookie minicamp. If you remember, Ryan, it wasn't anything necessarily that he did. It was more of the way that he conducted himself at that point. Like just watching him go through routes versus air. I was impressed with his, speed, his quickness, especially at the tight end position. It stood out to me on the practice field at rookie minicamp. He's consistently been pretty solid. And Jacob Hollister hasn't practiced this week because I think he got dinged up last week in OTAs. He went for a diving catch, didn't really play much the rest of that practice. So something must have happened there. He has been out this week. And with him out and Reggie Gilliam, he's in a red non-contact jersey. I'm not sure what the injury is there. It's, Quentin Morris, a lot like Antonio Williams, has gotten some chances. And, he's had his moments where he's gotten a big league opportunity and he went up against a big league opponent, like one play where it was him against Matt Milano, and Matt Milano won, and expectedly so. I mean, this is a veteran, borderline Pro Bowl caliber linebacker who just signed a big-time extension. But then there was one play that I think it was Jake Fromm, who whipped in a pretty quick pass. It might have been Trubisky. I'd have to go back and really scan through the notes. Whipped it to Morris quickly, who made a quick cutback move upfield and scored what probably would have been a touchdown. And, that's a nice little move. Listen, it's hard to say if it would have been a touchdown or not. I mean, they're not tackling, they're not really pursuing. But, those are the kinds of plays where for a kid like this, that's a big time play. And Reggie Gilliam made a lot of those kinds of plays during training camp last year. And I think Quentin Morris so far has, put his best foot forward to make, an impression on the coaching staff. And
that's important. A few years ago, the Bills were getting dinged up left and right at tight end, and they brought in Nate Becker, and it was in the middle or toward the end of training camp, I want to say. And Becker did enough in those opportunities to make the practice squad, and he's kind of been hanging around since then. These little opportunities, these moments that the players get, go a long way in their longevity in the NFL. Now, the Bills have Knox, they have Hollister, they have Sweeney. There's obviously been at least it feels like a million rumors about Zach Ertz coming to Buffalo. So yeah, there's a lot of tight ends there, and there's a potential trade for one that we've heard a lot about. But Quentin Morris in time could have a role on this team. So it's going to start out, though, with taking advantage of these opportunities, making some plays that catch the coaching staff's attention and say, hey, listen, there's not a spot for him on this 53-man roster this year, but there's definitely a spot for him on that 16-man practice squad, which they're going to implement again this year. And if an injury occurs, maybe we do bring him up rather than look for a veteran, because we see the raw talent, we see the potential. So it's an encouraging sign. He's an athletic tight end. He catches the ball pretty well. Had a pretty productive college career, but obviously the competition maybe is what kind of hurt him in terms of why he was not drafted.
Yeah, I think Gilliam, there's a comment in here. Chris Spencer's asking, does Morris look like he could leapfrog over Gilliam? I think that's the competition there, right? Those two guys. And really, that might be the competition for maybe like what you'd probably anticipate Tommy Sweeney's spot to be. And because I think right now, as you projected, you figure that probably Tommy Sweeney's in the driver's seat, 7th round draft pick 2 years ago, that really, had a couple moments in his rookie season where he flashed. Some of it was in the preseason, but, we'll see how he comes back. We'll see where he's at from a health perspective. But I think Gilliam's going to be heavily in the mix. A lot of experience last year, NFL snaps, which is a huge deal. And then Quentin Morris, it'll be fun to watch him progress. On the defensive side of the ball, before we move on, this linebacker position, Ryan, past Milano and Klein and Tremaine Edmonds, there's a ton of depth. And one of my big takeaways from this whole period in the spring is that this linebacker position is a lot better stocked with talent than it has been at any point in the last couple of years. I mean, maybe there was a time when Lorenzo Alexander was here, as Edmonds and Milano were still developing developing. They had some depth, but I like Julian Stanford and some of the other players that they had, but this is a roster that has players that are sneaky good at where you probably slot them. And one of those guys in particular is Joe Giles Harris. And he had his big first play of the spring of a camp season, if you will. It was Davis Webb was in at quarterback. He tried to throw a ball to Brandon Powell. It was kind of an awkward throw. I think it's hard to put the blame on Webb or Powell. It was kind of an awkward throw. Then it took just an awkward deflection, the way that he had to try to switch his body, popped up in the air, and Giles Harris came flying in, diving catch, grabbed it, bounced right back up, and flew down the field. I mean, you wrote a 5 things to know on this kid coming over from the Jacksonville Jaguars. They loved him down here and there, and I think that a lot of Jaguars fans I was reading were kind of miffed at why they didn't make more of an effort to bring him back. You talk about Tyrell Adams. AJ Klein is obviously in a really good position to make this roster. Marquell Lee, Andre Smith, who's got that versatility as a special team standout. There's going to be some battles at linebacker this summer.
Yeah, Tyrell Dodson. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Yeah, you're right. Giles Harris, I want to say the coaching turnover is probably what led to him not returning to Jacksonville, but he really came on when he was given the opportunity late last season when injuries took place. And he said that Miles Jack really helped him in his career and his development of his game. So he's just one of those players, and there's probably thousands of them that they just need that opportunity. They were waiting in the wings, and then depth chart had him number 3, number 4, whatever the case may be. And when they finally had the opportunity in Antonio Williams last year, week 17, they took advantage of it. So Giles Harris, it wouldn't shock me if he makes this 53-man roster as linebacker depth. We talked about Adams out of Houston. He was a tackling machine. He has a shot. They like Dodson. You mentioned Klein. Klein has a pretty safe spot, too, based on his salary, based on his play as well. He did really come on last season after a really rough start. He turned things around. So there is a little bit more talent and depth there than I think a lot of people realize.
Down in Miami, the internet was set ablaze on Tuesday as the interception tally ballooned to what I think finished at about 5. I mistakenly retweeted a 9 interception tweet from a fake account. I apologize. Got. I had to sit in the timeout for an hour there. But Tua, a tough day in a torrential downpour. But listening to Tua and Brian Flores talk about the mindset, I really like what Miami is doing down there. And I have questions about Tua. The questions about Tua that we both have had have been well documented on this program. But what I like is I think you have to spend this entire training period, the spring, training camp, the summer, preseason, putting Tua in uncomfortable situations, forcing the aggression out of him. Because once you get to the season, you can't have those moments anymore where, Tua's kind of sitting on his hands and kind of being passive and waiting for, the Ryan Fitzpatrick that's no longer on the roster to come in and save the day. You have to put him in uncomfortable positions now and see how he responds. And you read out of Miami that he had quite the encore on day 2. He performed better. He was making some good throws. And I think, listen, coming out of school, Tua was the 5th overall pick for a reason. I know the injury might have set him back. He didn't look right last year. I think that I've gotten to a point where I think Miami is the number 2 team in the AFC East. If I was projecting because of the questions at quarterback for New England, I like Miami's roster. I like what they've done at different times. I know Josh Allen has had their number, and I still like the Bills considerably more, especially with the questions for Tua. But I think that there's all of a sudden, the more I think about it, a real chance for Tua to maybe take a step forward a la Josh Allen in his rookie season. I think Tua's rookie season was much worse than Josh's. But what that step looked like, I don't know. But I definitely think they're doing the right kinds of things, building around the young quarterback and putting him in a position. I'm not nearly as comfortable writing off the Dolphins as I'm seeing a little bit amongst Bills fans.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And you're right. They were playing in like monsoon type conditions. 5 interceptions are to be, almost expected. Brissett had 2 of his own, 7 total is what I read. So it's going to happen, but you do want to see him get more aggressive and almost force the issue, because look at that wide receiver room. They have Devontae Parker, who really, when given the opportunities to make plays down the field, he does a really nice job of it. He did it against the Bills a few times last season. They added Will Fuller, who he is not a possession short receiver. He's a guy that can hurt you deep. They added Jalen Waddle. So they have a legit 1 through 3 there at wide receiver, Mike Gesicki at tight end. Now it's up to the quarterback play, and you have to force the issue, and there's no better time to do it than at practice. We just talked about that with Josh Allen in terms of building the rapport with Emmanuel Sanders. Do it now. Make the mistakes. Force some passes into tight windows, because it doesn't matter at the end of the day what happens, other than, you might get bashed on Twitter. You might get teased a little bit there because that information comes out, but it doesn't go on your stat line. It's a good learning experience. So the Dolphins seem to be doing what's right for Tua right now in terms of getting him to really get out of that comfort zone. Don't worry about dropping it off. Try to stretch the field. Try to make those plays. Now, Xavier Howard, we'll see what happens there. It looks like he's holding out and maybe even could get traded. And that would be a huge loss for the Dolphins. But at least at quarterback in this offense, they're trending in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. So a story came out today. It was reported, let me bring it up here so I relay it correctly, that according to Albert Breer, I think Tom Pelissaro was in on this as well, the Dolphins were one of now 3 teams that have crossed the 85% threshold for player vaccinations, fully vaccinated or in the process of getting fully vaccinated, along with the Broncos and the Saints. So 3 teams, the Dolphins, Broncos, and Saints, are looking like, those kinds of potential relaxed protocols that we talked about for teams that reach that threshold. It's obviously been a hot topic in the Bills media sphere over the last couple of weeks. And we'll get into why that is in a second. But those are 3 teams right off the bat here, early on, are going to walk into training camp with potentially the ability to operate like normal. And what that looks like, we kind of have to wait to kind of find out what the NFL and NFLPA come up with, because, from that perspective, you could operate like normal, but you still have the unvaccinated players that have some protocols that they have to follow. We saw that was put out there as well. And that's part of, this story. Cole Beasley, you put out a story today, Ryan. He went on a little bit of a Twitter spree. Talk a little bit about what he said.
Yeah, he was very upset with the NFLPA. He was very vocal about his feelings on being unvaccinated in terms of what it means for him and what he can and cannot do. The NFLPA and the NFL agreed to the protocols for the 2021. It looked like training camp and preseason, I'm sure, to get extended to the regular season as well. And there's things like the weight room. Cole Beasley can only be in the weight room or players that aren't vaccinated, I should say, can only be in the weight room when there's 15 or less players, and people who are vaccinated, there's no limit. You can't eat in the cafeteria with your peers. You can't take on marketing opportunities. There's a lot of restrictions in terms of what you can and cannot do. So when you sit here and you look at a team like the Dolphins, who have hit that 85% threshold, who will have a little bit of a competitive advantage compared to a lot of these other teams going into the season, it's definitely something that can benefit them in the long run. And I'm not going to sit here and say that if the Bills don't meet that threshold, they're not going to win the AFC East. They're not going to be able to repeat their 2020 season in terms of their success. But there are going to be some disadvantages, and there's going to be some things to work around. There's going to be some issues possibly to be hashed out. He was very vocal about it. I saw John Feliciano, who's been on the show, kind of stick up for his teammate. He did come out, though, on Twitter tonight and say, hey, I've had the vaccination, but I respect the opinion of my teammates and what they say and what they think. And he also feels like the NFLPA maybe isn't listening to the players, and they're kind of going ahead and agreeing to these things without a vote, without a long discussion about it with the people that they're representing.
Mm-hmm. The vaccination topic is, it's super divisive. Some vitriol just slinging around social media, every day around the topic. And it's really become politicized, heavily. And really, there's no way out of it, because no matter what you say about it now, it takes that political tone almost immediately. But, one of the things that's come up a lot is like, why do the media keep asking players? And whatever you think about whether a player should be asked if they're vaccinated or not, that's not a conversation that, I'm going to have here. I don't have a problem with it. I think that, if you're going to ask that question, the player has the right not to answer it. And so, but I think that the larger issue here is it is a football issue because it has the potential to impact football. Because if there is a choice that Cole Beasley can make where he doesn't have to get vaccinated. Jordan Poyer, who's obviously been in the news because of Rachel Bush, he doesn't have to get vaccinated. Like, nobody's forcing anybody to get vaccinated. What's going to happen then is there's going to be a rule set, like it or not, if you're not vaccinated. And that's just something that, it seems like the Bills, the way that they've handled it with the internal discussions amongst Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, and the players, that they've all kind of arrived on the fact that it's going to be each person to make their decision. We can put our best foot forward to explain how we're going to be impacted. And these protocols that were laid out yesterday in these reports, I mean, it's going to be a heavily impacted situation for players that aren't vaccinated. And that's why I think Sean McDermott has been so outspoken on the topic, coming forward and saying that he was vaccinated, coming forward and saying that the education process is continuing. And I think that the biggest issue that I think people have, and again, I don't want to get into a political slant with this, because I don't feel like that's my role necessarily to impart my take on the situation. I have it. I definitely have a take on what I think, people should do when it comes to the vaccination. I've done some research. I've talked to medical experts, personal friends and not personal friends, people, immunologists, about what this vaccination means and what it's going to prevent. I have that take, but I'm fine with you having your belief. The problem is that I think what we're getting into is that if you want to play football, if you want to have a chance to get through a season, what I think Sean McDermott and the Bills are trying to get across is, if we are wholly vaccinated as a group, we take out the possibility of running into a situation like last year when Josh Norman had to miss a game, Levi Wallace had to miss a game. What happens? That's Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. You know what I mean? So I think that that's where he's coming from. And honestly, I've really respected the way that Sean McDermott has handled this whole thing.
Yeah, and it's tough. It's tough if you're a player. It's tough if you're a coach. You have to be very careful about how you word things. You don't want to upset anyone in the locker room. But he just recently said we're trending in the right direction. He's hoping that more people go and get that vaccination. And it's not for selfish reasons. It's for football reasons, because of what you can and cannot do if you are vaccinated in terms of meetings, in terms of preparation. They've even gone as far as say coaches might not be able to be on the field in games if they're not vaccinated. So these decisions are going to impact the game in multiple ways, on the field, on game days, throughout the week in preparations. So I think every team, not just the Bills, are trying to do their part to make sure players understand that. And obviously players, though, have every right to their own opinion on the matter as well.
Indeed. Listen, in this day and age, we've talked about on the show multiple times, you can get the fight of it, of a lot of these controversial topics anywhere you want to go on social media. I mean, it's the day and age that we live in. And I know a lot of people come here for Bills talk, and I like to keep it on Bills talk, but this is a particular thing that Cole Beasley was passionate enough. There's been a united front from the Bills, especially on the player side, to not really discuss vaccination status. They've been asked about it pretty consistently. Josh Allen, Jordan Poyer, just to name a few that have come out and said, listen, I'm not going to answer that. I'm not going to talk too much about that. We're keeping that in-house. Cole Beasley, brought that conversation out of house on social media today because he's really passionate about it. And this is it's going to be a bigger issue down the line if there's something that happens. I mean, we could get to the season and it could go off without a hitch, and there could be no problem. And who knows, the Bills could hit this threshold, whatever it ends up being, and be in a situation where this doesn't impact it. But I just want to kind of explain a little bit why you're still hearing these questions in press conferences, because there is the potential, while COVID is still happening, that this could have an impact on football.
Yeah, you mentioned it, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs. If a premier playmaker for this team has to be quarantined or pull off the field for a game or 2 weeks or something like that, it's going to impact Buffalo's record. It's going to impact their game planning. It's going to impact their seeding. It goes a long way. So that's why the questions are being asked. That's why it's still such a hot topic, but it's also understandable why players feel like it's, their right not to disclose that information.
I'm just knocking my entire thing here. All right, guys, that's going to do it for our final show of the off-season program. We will be back. I'm not sure if we will have a show next week yet. I got a couple things floating around. Ryan and I have to powwow about our schedule for the next couple weeks and figure out, some guests that we've been working on and some different things like that. We're going to get back into the heavy guest oriented podcast that I know you guys have come to know and love. So stay tuned for that. Keep it locked on the YouTube channel because that's where you're first going to get the announcement of when the show is, when it's going to go live. We'll have so much to cover as we lead up to the season. I'll have my final 53-man roster projection of the spring here. That is going to come out on Monday. So stay tuned for that. Keep that in Syracuse.com, NewYorkUpstate.com if you want to read that. Maybe we'll even do a little podcast to go along with that. We'll see where we're at next week. Maybe that'll be our podcast next week. And then we'll do a pod. We'll have our first interview one the following week. Ryan, final thought. Hit us with it. Final thought.
It's been fun seeing what the Bills have been up to here in terms of the OTAs and now the mini camps. The success that the team had 1 year ago going into this year, expectations have probably not been this high since we've been talking about those Super Bowl Bills. So, just enjoy the ride. Hope that the Bills can stay on the right side of staying healthy, which they've been able to do pretty well over the last few seasons, because I think this team has the talent on both sides of the ball to make a real legitimate run for the Super Bowl.
Tops, your neighborhood store with more, is back as the official sponsor of Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. We're glad to have them on for the ride. Make sure you hit them up this weekend. If you guys are grilling, if you guys are, having a get together, a party, they'll stock you up. Thank you so much for watching. We will be back next week. Enjoy your weekend, everyone. Take care.